Well, good evening, everyone. I hope you all are doing wonderful on this beautiful Thursday evening. And I mean beautiful here. It has been a day here. Just stunningly gorgeous outside. Fantastic weather. I don't know what your weather's like, but in comparison to some of the weather I've had over the last couple of weeks throughout this area, I'm just grateful to be in a good, safe place. Wonderful time here at my home tonight. Grateful to be with you here as we wrap up the final two chapters. Now, don't worry yet, because next week we still have our final Screwtape Proposes a Toast, which is kind of this addition that's been added on. But we'll add that on next week. And so we will be live next Thursday night as our final part of this series with the Screwtape letters. But here we are, letters 30 and 31. It's hard to believe that it's already been this full semester. I haven't gone back and looked specifically to see how many of these we've done, but I would say 10 or 12, I think, walking through all these letters. And I'm so grateful for your presence, for your having been with us, whether you're watching live or after the fact. It's you honor me with your presence, and I'm grateful for all your comments, your questions, your thoughts along the way, and for all of those of you who might watch much later at a different time. Just as grateful for you and appreciate you guys. So, with no further ado, let us hurry into these last two letters, which is where it gets quite interesting. So, letter 30. My dear Wormwood, I sometimes wonder whether you think you have been sent into the world for your own amusement. I gather not from your miserably inadequate report, but from that of the infernal police, that the patient's behavior during the first raid has been the worst possible. So in essence here we're getting kind of a hint that there was a bombing raid. In fact, it was kind of hinted at in the previous letters that there was this worry that was coming about where they were worried about the air raids that were happening in the UK at that time, and that this patient was worried about these specifically. And so they seem to have now happened, and with that in the case, there's this fear that the patient's behavior is the worst possible outcome for the demons. He has been very frightened and thinks himself a great coward, and therefore feels no pride, which, by the way, pride is one of the great sins of which they have encouraged him to, Screwtape has encouraged Wormwood to directly kind of engage his patient within, to get him directly trying to feel pride. But he has done everything his duty demanded and perhaps a bit more. So even though he feels himself frightened and thinks himself a great coward, he still has done as his duty demanded and perhaps a bit more. Against this disaster, all you can produce on the credit side is a burst of ill temper with a dog that tripped him up, some excessive cigarette smoking, and the forgetting of a prayer. He said all you've been able to do in these last couple of whatever it is, days or weeks since the last letter, is you got him to get angry with a dog and some excessive cigarette smoking and then forgetting of a prayer. So this is not going well for Wormwood. What is the use of whining to me about your difficulties? If you are proceeding on the enemy's idea of justice and suggesting that your opportunities and intentions should be taken into account, then I am not sure that a change of heresy does not lie against you. Oh, that's fascinating. At any rate, you will soon find that the justice of hell is purely realistic and concerned only with results. Bring us back food or be food yourself. Ooh, he sets forth basically what's going to happen. It's either him or you, one or the other. The only constructive passage in your letter is where you say that you still expect good results from the patient's fatigue. That is well enough, but it won't fall into your hands. Fatigue can produce extreme gentleness and quiet of mind, and even something like vision. If you have often seen men led by it into anger, malice, and impatience, that is because those men have had efficient tempters. And so, here, Screwtape's basically saying, Wormwood, I'm not really sure you've been very good at this, and so while you might think fatigue is a good thing, it's not necessarily a good thing if it actually leads them to the gentleness and quiet of mind and even something like vision. It's only efficient tempters that can manage to turn fatigue into impatience and anger and malice. And if I can be honest with you, this is those times. In fact, how often I hear people say, I'm sorry I said that I was just tired and the rest. And it becomes this excuse when in reality, tiredness is not an excuse for behavior. Instead, we should be always keeping in mind who we are and where we are, no matter what the situation is, including in our great fatigue. The paradoxical thing is that the moderate fatigue is a better soil for peevishness than absolute exhaustion. This depends partly on physical causes, but partly on something else. It is not fatigue simply as such that produces the anger, but unexpected demands on a man already tired. Whatever men expect, they soon come to think they have a right to. The sense of disappointment can, with very little skill on our part, be turned into a sense of injury. Oh man, how many times have you felt like, well, it's just one thing after another. I had a rough day at work, and then I got home, and then man, there was another thing that popped up, and I can't believe it's happening. It just feels like I'm just being overwhelmed with one thing after another, as if somehow we controlled time or we controlled situations in all of the ways that we'd like to think we do. That's what he's getting at, is when you can create in the person a sense of injustice, a sense of injury to them, when in reality it's merely having to deal with the consequences of life, the things that go on around you. It is after men have given in to the irremediable, after they have despaired of relief and ceased to think even a half hour ahead, that the dangers of humbled and gentle weariness begin. To produce the best results from the patient's fatigue, therefore, you must feed him with false hopes. Put into his mind plausible reasons for believing that the air raid will not be repeated. Keep him comforting himself with the thought of how much he will enjoy his bed the next night. Exaggerate the weariness by making him think it will soon be over, for men usually feel that a strain could have been endured no longer at the very moment when it is ending, or when they think it is ending. In this, as is the problem of cowardice, the thing to avoid is the total commitment. Whatever he says, let his inner resolution be not to bear whatever comes to him, but to bear it for a reasonable period, and let the reasonable period be shorter than the trial is likely to last. So when I think through how this often works itself out in real life, it kind of reminds me of the very premise of how often we think trials should not be nearly as long as they ultimately end up being. And candidly, we find ourselves in this road all the time where our sense of time directly affects how we view life and how we view the things around us. And so for us, anything that it brings pain or brings sorrow seems overwhelming. It seems to last for far too long. Even though it might just be for a time, we always seem to make it out to be something far longer. And with that in mind, that's what he's hinting at, is make him seem like that surely it couldn't get any worse. Absolutely. And then when it gets worse, anything like surely it cannot get any worse. And make him think that this is an unreasonable time period, that I can bear some things for a while, but not this long. When in reality, we know Scripture says the exact opposite if you're a believer, that we can overcome all these things. I do not know whether he is likely to meet the girl under conditions of strain or not. If he does, make full use of the fact that up to a certain point, fatigue makes women talk more and men talk less. Much secret resentment, even between lovers, can be raised from this. This does happen when I'm tired at the end of the day, and my wife will tell you it's the same way I do become more quiet. And she'll ask me, it's like, what all happened today at work? And my responses are often a lot shorter than I think she would like. And in the same way, there are moments not where my wife is not a great talker in the sense of known for that, but she is one that loves to have, especially after she's been around just our children every day. I often think just conversations with other adults, whether it's friends or others or myself. And so she feels this. And so I can absolutely see how this could be misused to cause division amongst a husband, a wife, a friend, and so forth. And in this scenario, he's talking about this fiance, in essence, that the patient has. Probably the scenes he is now witnessing will not provide material for an intellectual attack on his faith. Your previous failures have put that out of your power, but there is a sort of attack on the emotions which can still be tried. It turns on making him feel, when first he sees human remains plastered on a wall, that this is what the world is really like, and that all his religion has been a fantasy. And I can tell you that this is something that that kind of hits home in a lot of ways for me, that there are a lot of people, and I understand especially what Lewis is hinting at here through these demons, in essence, that we'll say things like, well, the real world says this, and the real world is this, and there are a lot of people who I would agree, just from purely metaphorical perspective, live in a fantasy land where everything always goes their way, everything is always right. Many of my, especially my friends outside of faith, live oftentimes in what I would call a fairy tale land, a fancy land of ludicrous notions where they've never experienced a lot of things that the everyday American or the everyday person in the world experiences. We are the wealthiest nation possibly in the history of mankind, and yet we still feel abject poverty, and we still have abject poverty in our culture, and we're not very good at judging those things. And so, what he's getting at here is making him feel that his religion is a fantasy, because suddenly, when he sees, in this case, a human that has been killed, the human remains plastered on the wall, that the shock of it all, that he would go, how could there possibly be a God? Because this is real. This is, this horrible thing happened. So how could there possibly be a good and loving God? Something of that nature. You will notice that we have got them completely fogged about the meaning of the word real. They tell each other of some great spiritual experience. All that really happened was that you heard some music in a lighted building. Here, real means that bare physical facts, separated from the other elements and experiences they actually had. On the other hand, they will also say, it's all very well discussing that high dive as you sit here in an armchair, but wait till you get up there and see what it's really like. Here, real is being used in the opposite sense to mean not the physical facts, which they know already while discussing the matter in armchairs, but the emotional effect those facts will have on human consciousness. So this idea of real, we use it so interchangeably. And we say, well, the real world does this. Well, until you've experienced it, it doesn't feel real. It's just the words that somebody has said, particularly about something in that moment. And so you might say, well, that doesn't sound or feel like the real world. How am I supposed to understand that as the real world? So that's what he's hinting at. Either application of the word could be defended. But our business is to keep the two going at once, so that the emotional value of the word real can be placed now on one side of the account, now on the other, and as it happens, to suit us. So basically, the demon says we want to play with his sense of reality. I look in our culture today and see how this plays itself out in our sense, even within the concept of truth. What is truth? Your truth is your truth. My truth is my truth. My truth is real. Your truth is not. Well, it's real to you. It's not real to me. This is where it's playing itself out in our world today. The general rule, which we have now pretty well established among them, is that all experiences which can make them happier or better, only the physical facts are real, while the spiritual elements are subjective. In all experiences which can discourage or corrupt them, the spiritual elements are the main reality, and to ignore them is to be an escapist. Oh, it's fascinating, these little dichotomies he's laying forth. Thus, in birth, the blood and pain are real. The rejoicing a mere subjective point of view. In death, the terror and ugliness reveal what death really means. The hatefulness of a hated person is real. In hatred, you see men as they are, you are disillusioned. But the loveliness of a loved person is merely a subjective haze concealing a real core of sexual appetite or economic association. So basically, keep changing the terminology of real, make some things real and they're physical and the rest, and then other things real, and diminish the spiritual aspect of them. Wars and poverty are really horrible. Peace and plenty are mere physical facts about which men happen to have certain sentiments. The creatures are always accusing one another of wanting to eat the cake and have it. But thanks to our labors, they are more often in the predicament of paying for the cake and not eating it. Oh, I love that little line there. Your patient, properly handled, will have no difficulty in regarding his emotion at the sight of human entrails as a revelation of reality, and his emotion at the sight of happy children or fair weather as mere sentiment, instead of the joy of what God gives us in this world. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. So letter 31 is what we're about to dive into. And let me say, I've said it before. I think it's letter 21 is probably my favorite, just for the sense of the audacity of it, the craziness of the writing that Lewis goes through. But if I'm honest, this last one is the one there's this culmination that feels very strong, and I love it. And it also gives us some insights into something that happens that we don't necessarily see up to this point. My dear, my very dear Wormwood, my poppet, my pig's knee, how mistakenly now that all is lost you come whimpering to ask me whether the terms of affection in which I address you meant nothing from the beginning. Far from it. Rest assured, my love for you and your love for me are like as two peas. I have always desired you as you, pitiful fool, desired me. The difference is that I am the stronger. I think they will give you to me now, or a bit of you. Love you? Why, yes. As dainty a morsel as ever I grew fat on. The hint here is that his patient has been lost, has died, and gone to heaven. And so, because of that, Screwtape is writing specifically to Wormwood, saying, "Oh, you think somehow that because of my love for you, I'm going to let you off the hook, or that there's some way out of this. No, no, I do love you, and I'm going to love you as I'm going to grow fat on you, as I'm going to devour you myself. In fact," he says, "I think they're going to give me a little bit of you." So this is not going well for Wormwood in any way, shape, or form. "You have let a soul slip through your fingers. The howl of sharpened famine for that loss re-echoes at this moment through all the levels of the kingdom of noise down to the very throne itself. It makes me mad to think about it. How well I know what happened at the instant when they snatched him from you." So he's saying the loss of this soul in heaven, in the kingdom of noise, basically in hell, down to the very throne itself, it makes him mad to think about it. They were snatched away. He could even picture the moment in which it happened. "There was a sudden clearing of his eyes, was there not?" So now he's talking about the patient. "As he saw you for the first time, and recognized the part you had had in him, and knew that you had it no longer. Just think, and let it be the beginning of your agony, what he felt at that moment. As if a scab had fallen from an old sore, as if he were emerging from a hideous shell-like teeter, as if he shuffled off for good and all a defiled, wet, clinging garment. He had finally gotten rid of this demon off of him like a scab that falls away, suddenly getting out of wet clothes and suddenly being freed from them all. By hell, it is a misery enough to see them in their mortal days, talking of dirtied and uncomfortable clothes and splashing in hot water and giving little grunts of pleasure, stretching their eased limbs. What then of this final stripping, this complete cleansing?" And so here he's diving into this very real sense of how painful it is to see these souls get away from hell, in essence. "The more one thinks about it, the worse it becomes. He got through so easily. No gradual misgivings, no doctor's sentence, no nursing home, no operating theater, no false hopes of life, sheer, instantaneous liberation." And here is where it seems to be the hint that it was during one of the bombing raids and that he was killed instantly. And with that instant liberation, that was how easily he got away. So this death was actually very quick and painless in essence. "One moment it seemed to be all our world. The scream of bombs, the fall of houses, the stink and taste of high explosive on the lips and in the lungs, the feet burning with weariness, the heart cold with horrors, the brain reeling, the legs aching. Next moment, all this was gone. Gone like a bad dream, never again to be of any account. Defeated, outmaneuvered fool." And so he's now referencing Wormwood here specifically, defeated, outmaneuvered fool. So with this bombing, he goes from this horrific scene that kind of plays itself out, and then as a human, we feel this scene. In fact, for those reading this during the World War II and the time, it would have felt so real and in some ways so comforting, especially when you realize the defeat that is happening when you are in Christ, in essence, that you, no matter what happens and how terrible the world, death is not the end. Death is merely the beginning of something beautiful with God. And I love that defeated, outmaneuvered fool as he references this demon. Did you mark how naturally, as if he'd been born for it, the earth-born vermin entered the new life? How all his doubts became in the twinkling of an eye ridiculous? I know what the creature was saying to itself. Yes, of course. It always was like this. All horrors have followed the same course, getting worse and worse and forcing you into a kind of bottleneck till at the very moment when you thought you must be crushed. Behold, you were out of the narrows and all was suddenly well. The extraction hurt more and more, and then the tooth was out. The dream became a nightmare, and then you woke. You die, and then you are beyond death. How could I have ever doubted it? As he saw you, he also saw them. I know how it was. You reeled back dizzy and blinded, more hurt by them than he had ever been by bombs. The degradation of it. Oh, this is one of my favorite parts because, as you notice, it's like he saw them. So whether it's God, it's Jesus, the Holy Spirit, it's angels, it's the heavenly beings in that, he saw them and he says, you reeled back. So Wormwood, the demon, reeled back and blinded. And he said, oh, you were degraded by this whole thing. That this thing of earth and slime could stand upright and converse with spirits before whom you, a spirit, could only cower. Perhaps you had hoped that the awe and strangeness of it would dash his joy. But that is the cursed thing. The gods are strange to mortal eyes, and yet they are not strange. He had no faintest conception till that very hour of how they would look, and even doubted their existence. But when he saw them, he knew that he had always known them and realized what part each of them had played at many an hour in his life when he had supposed himself alone. So that now he could say to them one by one, not who are you, but so it was you all the time. And I'll just be honest with you, this is one of those moments that kind of moves me in a lot of ways because I love that premise. That there will be time when we will stand before God and we won't say, who are you? But so that was you in that time. So it was you in that moment. So when I was struggling here, there was you that was with me. I love that very premise. All that they were and said at this meeting woke memories. The dim consciousness of friends about him which had haunted his solitudes from infancy was now at last explained. That central music and every pure experience which he had always just evaded memory was now at last recovered. Recognition made him free of their company almost before the limbs of his corpse became quiet. Only you were left outside. He saw not only them, he saw him. This animal, this thing begotten in a bed, could look on him. What is blinding, suffocating fire to you is now cool light to him, in clarity itself, and wears the form of a man. You would like, if you could, to interpret the patient's prostrations in the presence, his self-abhorrence and the utter knowledge of his sins, yes, Wormwood, a clearer knowledge even than yours, on the analogy of your own choking and paralyzing sensation when you encounter the deadly air that breathes from the heart of heaven. But it's all nonsense. Pains he may still have to encounter, but they embrace those pains. They would not barter them for any earthly pleasure. All the delights of sense or heart or intellect with which you could once have tempted him, even the delights of virtue itself, now seem to him in comparison but as that half-nauseous attractions of a rattled harlot would seem to a man who hears that his true beloved, whom he has loved all his life and whom he has had believed to be dead, is alive, and even now at his door. He is caught up into that world where pain and pleasure take on transfinite values and all our arithmetic is dismayed. Once more, the inexplicable meets us. Next to the curse of useless tempters like yourself, the greatest curse upon us is the failure of our intelligence department. If only we could find out what he is really up to. Oh, if only we could find out. Alas, alas, that knowledge, in itself so hateful and knockish a thing, should yet be necessary for power. Sometimes I am almost in despair. All that sustains me is the conviction that our realism, our rejection in the face of all temptations, of all silly nonsense and claptrap, must win in the end. Meanwhile, I have you to settle with. Most truly do I sign myself your increasingly and ravenously affectionate uncle, Screwtape. So he closes this letter out with what I would argue is some of the most beautiful imagery and most encouraging, if you're a believer, imagery laid forth by a brilliant writer in C.S. Lewis, and being able to lay forth, even from this negative perspective, these demons, this unreal situation, unreal, beautiful moment of standing before God and standing before Jesus and seeing those that have gone before and the welcome and the victory and so that was you the whole time. Every one of those beautiful moments displayed through literature, but also can encourage in the soul of an individual. And I hope that's been the case for you. So that's the end. And next week, we will close out with one of the additional chapters, and I hope you have it in your book. If not, I'll break it down next week. But Screwtape proposes a toast. This has been a fantastic series. I love these books. I love Lewis as a writer. And in fact, I will in the coming weeks be sharing with you what we'll be going into in the fall. I'm very excited about that. I've already begun working on it. But until then, know that you are loved and I appreciate you. And if I can ever do anything for you, answer any question at all, please feel free to reach out to me through social media, any way I can help, through YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, whatever it may be. Until we see each other again, whether on this side or the next, just as portrayed in that last little moment, I love you all, and I will see you then.